Welcome one and welcome all to Primetime Mitch, and today it's going to be a slightly different video to what I've done before. Today I'm going to be doing an original versus remake video, and it is going to be covering the 1962 Cape Fear directed by J. Lee Thompson up against the 1991 remake directed by Martin Scorsese. Now, I'm not usually a fan of remakes, so this is kind of a little bit of fun for me because I have a fondness for this one. It's not one I'd dismiss very easily, and I'm a big fan of the original film. So I thought I'd sort of put the two against each other and see the similarities, see what does certain things better, those kind of comparisons. So I'm really looking forward to this video. First of all, thank you guys, everyone out there that subscribed and followed and shared and liked following the Halloween ranking video, ranking all 13 movies from 78 to 23. I really appreciate your feedback, all your lists down below for me to read. Some of them were very interesting, to say the least, and I love sparking a debate like that. And also on that subject, I just wanted to sort of highlight a contact of mine on Instagram, Are They All Dead? Basically what he does is creates posters, original style posters for horror movies. Just a couple coming up on the screen there. I particularly like this Scream one for the upcoming latest installment. I'm a big fan of that. Also some lovely Halloween designs as well. Go check out his page on Instagram. The links are down below. Some really, really nice imagery, some beautiful colours used in there. So thank you for that. And I'm sure he'll thank you for dropping by as well. Just before we get going on this, just remember there are spoilers in this review. I'm not going to tell you the movie end to end, but I am going to mention things that you might not want to hear if you haven't seen the movie. So please, before you watch this head to head, go see those two movies. Links in the description below for where you can purchase this film and its subsequent remake. Go watch them, put this in the watch later, then come back and I will talk to you about it then. If you have seen them both, let's go. So let's get into what I'm going to be discussing today. Cape Fear. Now, as I said earlier, this was originally directed in 1962 by J. Lee Thompson and penned by James R. Webb. Now, I look at those names, obviously as an average movie lover, I do a little bit of research, but I do know off the bat that J. Lee Thompson is an Academy Award nominee for Guns of Navarone. And for my leaning towards horror, I know him as the director of Happy Birthday to Me. And behind the screenplay, Webb, best known for the likes of Apache and more notably How the West Was Won. This was a big movie at the time, a very risky movie at the time. We fast forward 29 years and we've got Martin Scorsese in the director's chair. We've got Wesley Strick adapting the original screenplay, and we have Cape Fear 1991. Now, Wesley Strick I'm familiar with because we've just done a very successful Arachnophobia watch along and he was on board for that one. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of break it down into styles. I'm going to break it down character-wise. We're going to look at the villains, the heroes of the hour, the victims probably is a better word, and we're going to look at just how much I personally enjoy either of them for whatever reasons. And if you want to drop in the comments below what you think of these two movies, how you would put them against each other and which you think is the better of the two. Now, firstly, I'm going to go off the plot, because these are not shot-for-shot remakes, thankfully. Now, in the 1962 version, Gregory Peck plays Sam Bowden, an attorney and a family man who has a hand as a witness in convicting Max Cady, played by Robert Mitchum. Now, I just want to throw it out there, first of all, that 1991's Cape Fear is a movie that I remember from my childhood. It was on Sky Movies, it came out, the big release. And obviously, because I was a kid, I wasn't waiting for cinematic releases, I was waiting for them to come out on TV. That was very similar to how it was for all of the horror. I remember Scream's release on Sky Movies. I don't remember the cinematic release, as a good example. So once I'd watched Cape Fear from 91, I went back to watch the original, and I was expecting Gregory Peck's Sam Bowden to be an attorney that was directly involved with Max Cady, who either represented him or went against him. This is very different. The first movie focuses on a budding attorney who happens to have been involved with the Max Cady case as a witness and was crucial in him going to prison for 8 years for the assault of a young girl. Now, this is interesting because I'm just wondering, is this what got Sam Bowden into law? Was that experience and wanting to find justice and put people like Cady behind bars and out of society? Maybe that's something I'm sort of making up on my own. The sentence in 1962's version is 8 years. The sentence in 1991's version is 14 years. And that isn't the only difference, because obviously in the 91 version, Nick Nolte is playing Sam Bowden, and he is the attorney that actually defended Max Cady. So that's kind of a nice twist. You would think it might be the one who's on the opposite side. But no, it wasn't just that he couldn't spare him the 14-year sentence. It was the fact that he buried evidence that may have shaved time off that 14-year sentence. Now that's the plot. Obviously, there are twists and differences along the way, but that is sort of the general outline and base for what you're working on in both these movies. It's a little cleverer. And it also, as we'll go into in a little while, it gives, however bad Max Cady is, it gives him just a little bit of motive that in his head makes sense, but also can be understood to some degree. Now that brings me on to sort of the character traits, because Sam Bowden in the original movie is a family man, an overall decent man. The only reason he's about to be put through what he is put through is for doing the right thing, is for doing the decent thing. Now, I like Gregory Peck's portrayal because I think there's such an innocence to him, but there's also a very firm, very hard, very stern man in there that is very protective of his family and also seems to be very good at his job as well. And his act of heroism years before, if it has spurred him on to become a lawyer and to do good things from then on, who can argue that? So I like that portrayal of Sam Bowden. Now, Nick Nolte's in 91 is somewhat different because he is a good guy. He is just a man trying to do his job. He is a man that obviously has morals and principles, and that is why he buries evidence of Max Cady's victim being promiscuous, which unfortunately, as a social commentary, is the way things are. These things impact the sentencing despite the guilt and the threat posed by the perpetrator. So I think Scorsese's going down the J. Lee Thompson route of social realism there. So he's sort of taking a leaf out of that book. It is very much the same message as we go on, but that little bit of information there, I think, is sort of it's put there for a reason, that it takes that one little detail to change everything. You make of that what you will. Is he immoral? Has he got some flaws? Or is that just a genuine concern for society, trying to protect his daughter and anybody else's daughter from a man like this? You're kind of given a question to ask there, and I quite like that. But I do probably prefer Gregory Peck's version of it overall because of the sheer decency of the man. Now that brings me on to the other characters. Now I'm going to group the family as one and sort of talk about them briefly individually. But in 1962, you have Polly Bergen playing Peggy, and you have Laurie Martin taking on the role of Nancy. Now, I believe Nancy is 14 in this one, which is actually, it's very risky to sort of throw her into the mix in the sort of story that's about to unfold. I think they don't take as many risks in that sense in the remake. All you get from Peggy and from Nancy is just pure innocence. They are just a tight-knit, close, loving family. They get along. They are the quintessential unit, really. That creates for a very, very dark journey, I think. Now, with the 91 version, you've got the excellent Jessica Lange playing Lee and a very fresh-faced Juliette Lewis playing Danielle, who is 15 in this one. I believe on the cusp of 16 as well, but they put a year up on her. Now, this is a very different take on Bowden's family. They are more dysfunctional in this. There are issues with potential infidelity on Bowden's part, which again, character-wise, I'll get into that in a moment. There are issues with what seems to be continual fights, arguments between the two parents, which then in turn affects Danielle, who acts up. She is constantly shown walking out of rooms and locking herself away while this goes on, to suggest that this goes on a lot. It directly influences how she behaves in the movie. So that is something that's explored that wasn't part of the original. Which do I prefer in terms of the family's behaviour? Again, I prefer the original on that. I think it makes what escalates after far more hard-hitting. I understand completely why Strick would go down this route if he's adapted this screenplay to sort of tweak it and change it a little, to explore the characters a little more. If you're going off character development and character body, then 1991 takes it. You get to learn far more about the characters in 91 than you do in 1962. But I just think in the story that you're being told and the side you want to take and the injustices that are about to occur, you should really be sticking with that loving, close-knit family. I think those extra dimensions kind of complicate it slightly. Now to the villain. As far as 62 is concerned, I am a huge fan of Robert Mitchum when he plays roles like this. Didn't do it too often, but when he did, my God, did he give it his all. One of my favourite movies from that era is Night of the Hunter. The 1955 noir thriller it is called, but I would say it leans very much into the horror. Robert Mitchum is terrifying in that movie as Harry Powell, misogynistic, murderous preacher who throughout the movie chills you to the bone. And in this movie, he is very similar. The sinister way he carries himself on screen, the smile, it's beyond devious. It's got everything in there. It's sleazy, it's calculating, it's psychopathic, sociopathic, whatever you want to call it. It is everything, and it's all in that one expression he gives throughout the movie. He's got that smile on his face, which suggests that he has got the upper hand no matter what. And that's what this movie is about, really. It is about him being above the law. It's about him treading the exact boards that he needs to tread in order to stay away from prosecution. I think Mitchum is absolutely outstanding in this role. I find it incredible, just on a side note, from a little bit of research, that Robert Mitchum wasn't interested in playing this role until he was given a case of bourbon. That almost fits with the character, especially in certain scenes.
I believe my cousin left me enough to buy me another blast.
I know Telly Savalas was screen tested for it, but Peck and Thompson wanted him in this role. I know that Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum didn't really get along on the set. That's for another time. I'm so glad that he eventually did accept this role, because he was absolutely made for it. Now we fast forward to the 1991 version, and you have the legendary Robert De Niro stepping into this role as Max Cady. Now, there is a huge difference between these characters, but at the same time, you get the idea that they are a retelling. What they play on in the 91 version is that Max Cady has spent the 14 years in jail learning to read. He was illiterate when he went in. He has not only learned to read, he has learned about law. He is very spiritual. And that is given to you straight away when he's leaving his cell, and all those books on the shelves. I've read them all. I don't need them anymore. He is less articulate than Mitchum, I feel. They're very similar accents, but I don't feel he is as well spoken. I think there's almost that naivety in his voice which suggests that he isn't quite as intelligent, but then you've consistently are reminded throughout just how sharp he has become.
Because I like to play my comings and goings with friends. But if you're not my friend, you're playing my comings and goings, I'd call that presumptuous. In fact, I'd call it downright rude.
Where they don't really play on Cady's intelligence in 62, they do say he studied law, but they don't really go into any more than that. It certainly wasn't suggested that he couldn't read or write when he went into prison. They definitely do that here. And they really make a point of emphasizing the intelligence of Cady in this remake, which I did quite like.
50,000 to 14 years. 14 years times 365 days is about, I'd say about 5,000 days. Now you divide that by 50,000, and that's like $10 a day. That's not even minimum wage.
And the unsettling thing is, like I mentioned before, he has more motive in the 91 version. He has reason in his own way and in his own mind to gain revenge on Bowden for hiding that evidence, whereas obviously in 1962 there's almost absolutely no reason for him to be the way he is. He has literally just been caught and he doesn't like it. That's a very sort of psychopathic reason to go and gain revenge on somebody. It shows a real sadism and a real twisted head mechanism. In the second one, as bad as he is and as evil a man as he is, you have a nailed-on motive. I could have had years off my sentence. He's not admitting fault. He's not admitting that he is a bad person. He doesn't really care. He has that horrible trait to him, but you know why he's doing it. In the first one, there is no reason other than it's almost childish. Which do I prefer more? That's a difficult one, because there are so many merits to both performances. I am going to edge with Mitchum because I think that he was more cold, calculated, and sinister, whereas De Niro obviously is that with the volume turned right up. He hams it up. And obviously further down the years that the movies get sort of more action-packed and more risky and more over the top. And I think this movie needed the sinister, quiet approach. So I would say that for that, Robert Mitchum's Max Cady takes it for me. But De Niro deserves a lot of credit for a mass amount of dedication to that role. We know he's a little bit of a method actor. I know he had I already had his teeth ground down for this role, which is dedication to say the least. But he got himself into a physical shape, because in the original, Max Cady is in great shape. He has that sort of almost the body of a 1950s wrestler, whereas De Niro sort of does the same years and years later. He has been training in the gym and he's a big, bulky, muscular guy. Now, I know he is not taller than Nick Nolte, and they needed to make sure that he looked like a presence and a threatening presence, and De Niro put the work in to do that. It's a very cool modern take on Max Cady. I just prefer the first one. Little extra things are thrown in there as well. I mean, there's more made of the money that Max Cady has in the 91 version. He's driving around in a flash car, whereas in the first one, they almost believe he is a vagrant until they find out his bank balance. They do play with that in 91, but they are more obvious about his possessions, his dress, that kind of thing. And that brings me on to the look of the movie. We are crossing generations here. I love the old school movies. I love Hitchcock, and a lot of his influence is in this movie. I know Thompson envisioned this movie in black and white, feeling that colour would lessen the atmosphere, and a lot of the lighting angles, the eerie musical score, the close-ups, and the subtle hinting of violence and the behaviours of Cady without actually showing it full on. A lot of that is very Hitchcockian, I think. And I love the look of these movies back then. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to favour that necessarily over the work of the 91 remake. I mean, for a start, even in the opening credits, they bring on board Saul Bass, who was a frequent collaborator with Hitchcock, to create those title sequences at the start. You have these bold sky shots, really bold colour in the clouds and the moving clouds above Cady as he's coming out of the prison as well. These are all sort of coloured reimaginings of Hitchcock, in my opinion. But Scorsese also leaves his own imprint on this. Like I said, the bold colours, he loves those close-ups as well, split diopter shot that you see. And also, there are freeze frames. There is the narration as well, if we're talking the audio, which I will go on to. There's a lot of Scorsese in this, mixed with a lot of techniques used in the original. So it's very difficult to say which one I really like the look of the most. When it comes to effects and things like that, the original is obviously limited in what it can do, but it uses more character behaviours and physical altercations, whereas the 91 remake, you get a boat crash, you get all that crazy confrontation whilst it's crashing, and there's more of that in the remake. So I think I'm going to give them a tie for their own eras on that sense. But if you're talking about how it looks overall, which I prefer and which I enjoyed the most, I would probably say visually, there's a lot of really nice stuff in the remake. So I'm going to give Scorsese the points on that one. More rather, Freddie Francis, who directed one of my favourite horror films of all time, the 1972 Tales from the Crypt. So his involvement in this has to be a factor in why I like the visuals of this movie. Now, visual is sort of slightly different to the tone. I'm going to go into tone now because I actually think I prefer, and I'm going to be very quick on this one, I think I prefer the classic suspense of 1962's version as opposed to the sort of intense psychological thriller approach of 91. I totally am okay with both versions, but I love that classic suspense. It has still got that noir feel in there, despite the fact that there's some horror elements in there. There's a lot of risky content in there for the time, but it does still maintain that crime noir feel to it. And I really, really like that when it comes to a sinister movie or a sinister character or a villain. I want that classic suspense just a little bit more than the intense psychological, grittier version from 91. Now to where they actually go with the story. I can't really categorize this. I'm sort of talking more along the lines of what they give us in terms of happenings and situations and scenarios. Now, it's obvious that 1962 cannot show the kind of things that the 91 remake shows. We aren't going to see Max Cady biting the cheek off a woman in 1962, but sometimes it's what you don't see that can have just as big an impact. And some of those scenes with Max Cady in 1962 with his unfortunate victims throughout, they are uncomfortable because you know what's happening, you know what he's doing. In particular, when he eventually catches up with Peggy, that scene I felt horribly uncomfortable throughout. The closeness of the two of them, the invasion of her space and privacy that he was inflicting on her is very, very uncomfortable to watch. The one thing I will say about the original is the first girl that he sets his sights on. It's very random. There isn't a lot of build-up. There isn't a lot of chemistry between those two to understand why they've gotten into this situation. The only thing you get is she's suddenly in the car with him after a fleeting moment, so you don't see anything in between, and she makes a passing comment about him that he obviously takes to heart and keeps with him until later on. That's it, and it is very random, and I didn't feel anything from her character to suggest that it should hit so hard when he does eventually come out of his shell and show his true colours. This is where I think the remake did it a little better. They attach his victim to Sam Bowden. He is getting a little too close to her, as that is suggested later on when he and Lee are having those huge arguments about him potentially cheating on her. He's playing squash with her. Is it racquetball in America? Either way, they're playing sports together, and she's obviously got a thing for him. He's possibly getting tempted by it, and obviously Katie knows this. He finds this out and he goes to a bar and they have a lengthy discussion where she is giddy, she is drunk, and then right at the last minute she realizes what he is and he attacks her. And it is a brutal scene, and it's probably the kind of thing that steered Steven Spielberg away from this movie. He was scheduled to make this, but he did a little swapperoo with Scorsese to go off and do Schindler's List, and that kind of worked well for him. But this is a very violent scene, a very brutal scene, and you do watch it with an anxiety. So the remake really emphasizes the importance of this lady, the connection to Sam, and also it shows how Max is able to manipulate her. So I think the remake does better in that sense. When it comes to his actions at the end on the family, I think the 62 one is very impactful. Like I said, I think Peggy's altercation with him is very unsettling, and there is more of an action feel to the 91 remake. It's more like the big crescendo in a thriller. So it isn't as unsettling and uncomfortable to watch. So I think the 62 one does the later scene with the family just a little bit better. And we also get in the remake direct contact with Bowden's daughter. Obviously the names are changed for these movies, so I'm not really going to go into that. That's just it's really a non-entity when it comes to the story and how we're measuring these two up. But with Danielle in the remake, he has direct contact with her. He poses as a drama teacher, and he, again, another very unsettling, unpleasant scene, knowing this young girl and knowing her age and seeing him manipulating her and taking advantage of the situation at home. He knows that the parents are battling each other and there are dysfunctional elements, and he plays on that and plays on her trauma from that. And it's invasive, it's nasty, and that's a very, very hard-hitting point of the movie. It goes on a little long for me, but I guess they're trying to show how he draws it out, how he almost grooms her. In 62, he kind of just focuses on his daughter because it's his daughter, and he knows that'll hurt Sam in the worst way possible. He does make some very inappropriate remarks at the docks.
Say, she's getting to be almost as juicy as your wife, ain't she?
And he always has that eye on her all the time. He's always watching her. So there is that same unsettling feeling. It's just 62 could not do the things that 91 could. And I know that 62 was heavily cut. So we could have seen a hell of a lot more in that movie had those restrictions not been in place at the time. So for the story itself, I actually think 91 can take more risks. It's got more freedom. But because they go down the dysfunctional family route and the burial of the evidence, and they change the story somewhat, some of that sense of complete injustice isn't there for me. In 62, he is literally attacking a man and his family because this man stopped him breaking the law. Whereas in the second one, he's attacking a man and his family because he broke the law in order to give him a higher sentence. So there's more reasoning in that one, there's less reasoning in the 62 one. So I think the story in 62 overall is probably a more satisfying one to me. The social elements in it, the social commentary in it, the fact that he is able to hover on the brink of being pulled in for his behaviour and his harassment and his stalking of the family, but he knows he's doing just enough that it is not in any way illegal. The fact that this man has convictions for such heinous crimes and he is able to stalk and terrorise his family and work within the law, that's frightening in itself. The fact that he would come out with this agenda simply because he was caught is frightening enough. So I think all the complex elements of 91, though it still makes for a good movie, I think for this particular story, I prefer 62. Musically, both are wonderful. I'm going to give them a tie straight away on that, because you got the best working on the 62 version in Bernard Herrmann, who worked on a lot of Hitchcock movies, Psycho, The Birds, and as I just recently reviewed, North by Northwest. But he had quite a wonderful career before this, working on The Day the Earth Stood Still and Citizen Kane, which I believe was his debut. So you've got the best of the best working on the Cape Fear soundtrack in 62. And although there is sort of that orchestral theme to most movies of that era, and it is of its time, it lends to what you're watching. Those shadows, those dark, unsettling shots, and the music works for it. And I think it's all about matching with the content, and it absolutely does that for me. Now, you look at the remake, I sometimes think that a lot of modern movies, there's too much score sometimes. I remember when I spoke to Lito Velasco on here, I was talking about less is more. They obviously went for a similar, more modernized version of what the 62 movie gave us. Elmer Bernstein and his adaptation of that original score. This is a man with a ludicrous back catalogue of classic work throughout that era. You've got To Kill a Mockingbird, The Great Escape, True Grit, My Left Foot, amazing movies, tons of comedy work as well, Stripes, Airplane, Ghostbusters. Again, the best of the best brought in, and it's adapting the original. Like I said, this is a tie to me. Both movies have the perfect score for what they're giving us, and yeah, they both win on that one. It's quite dramatic, the music, but in different ways in both. So yeah, I think the charm of this movie definitely comes from what you're hearing throughout. Overall, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a big classic movie fan. I love movies from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I try and watch as many of them as possible. I could put Cape Fear on Class 6 if I wanted to do an in-depth review on it. They're not everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone likes the black and white. Not everyone likes the orchestral sounds. People want sometimes to see more because obviously you couldn't show a whole lot of what we can see now back then, but I really, really do enjoy them. So I can appreciate both versions of this. I'm not a big remakes fan. Like I said, there are far more remakes I don't like than remakes I do like. This is a remake I do like. I think it was respectful. I think it was very important to try and bring back this classic movie and bring it to the attention. I love the fact that they bring in Robert Mitchum and Gregory Peck and Martin Balsam to play roles within the movie. It's just such a nostalgic kick to see them involved in it. The casting was very, very good. I find it incredible that if Spielberg had taken on this movie, he had Bill Murray in mind to play Max Cady. And I love Bill Murray, but God, I cannot imagine him covered in tattoos, doing the kind of things that Robert De Niro does in this movie. De Niro's performance is excellent. Robert Mitchum's performance is excellent. Both play Max Cady with their own kind of sinister twist. One slightly more reserved than the other, but they work for the movies they're in, and it's just about what your preference is. I think Nick Nolte does a great job. I think Jessica Lange does a good job, both in that remake. They are given that conflicting family situation, and they really go for it. Jessica Lange in particular is extremely impressive in her turmoil throughout that movie. So overall, I would probably say I prefer the original, but it's purely through charm and sentiment, because I think Scorsese produced a worthy remake. I love the constant reminder that we cannot put somebody in jail for what they might do. And there's a fantastic line in the original where, following on from that comment, Sam Bowden comes out with,
"And thank heaven for that."
And that's deep in itself. But both movies are really worth a watch. There are links down below to get these movies if you want to go out and have them on your shelf as a keepsake and watch them every once in a while, because I always try and get a viewing of these movies in when I can, and it was a joy to watch them today for you guys. There's no real winners in this. It's just, again, it's just opinion. It's just my opinion. And I love doing this. I love doing original versus remake, and I think I'd like to do this again. If you enjoyed this video, apart from your much appreciated likes, shares, subscribes and comments, tell me what else you would like to see me do. Which other movies would you like me to compare with each other? I'm not always saying I will be this glowing about both. Like I said, there's a lot of remakes I don't like. As a horror fan, I'm sure that's understandable. Give me your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if there's any other head-to-head you'd like me to do on this channel. So with that in mind, I'm going to say thank you guys. I'm going to say thank you for watching, for subscribing, for liking, for commenting, for sharing, for being part of Primetime Mitch. And as we go into the Christmas season, there's going to be some festive fun along the way on Primetime Mitch on this channel. So thank you very much, guys, and I will see you very soon.